5:30, the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business resuming debate at second reading of Bill C-311, Violence Against Pregnant Women Act, bill standing in the name of Mrs. Wagantall.
When we left this, the Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock had 3 minutes left. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the first hour of debate on Bill C-311, the Violence Against Pregnant Women Act, there was a lot of pushback by Liberals and the NDP on issues not in the bill. The lack of care and rigor in this debate should be distressing to Canadians paying attention at home. It is abundantly clear that this legislation is about one thing: protecting vulnerable women through a criminal code amendment. It is very important that this debate centers on what is actually before us, and we look to consistency in sentencing across the country as an objective. So pregnancy as an aggravating factor is no longer discretionary but mandatory to consider. I will read the bill in its entirety into the record so there is clarity for all those following the debate. Quote, Bill C-311, an act to amend the criminal code, violence against pregnant women. Preamble. Whereas Parliament wishes to denounce and deter violence against pregnant women by explicitly including pregnancy as an aggravating circumstance for the purpose of sentencing, now, therefore, His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. Short title, this act may be cited as the Violence Against Pregnant Women Act, Criminal Code paragraph 718.2 sub A of the Criminal Code is amended by adding the following: evidence that the offender in committing the offence abused a person whom the offender knew to be pregnant, evidence that the offence caused physical or emotional harm to a pregnant victim. End quote. That's it. A preamble, short title, brief amendments to beef up sentencing if a violent crime is committed against a pregnant woman. This is common sense legislation that protects women who choose to carry their baby to term. Nowhere in this legislation is there any reference to the unborn or reproductive issues. Making this debate about something other than protecting women is unfair and uncaring. This is where their fake feminism is exposed. Just last week, it was reported that Paul Bernardo was transferred to a medium security prison. Conservatives brought a unanimous consent motion calling for an immediate return of this brutal serial rapist and killer to a maximum security prison. We were shouted down by the Liberal member from Kingston and the Islands. They made their intentions clear then. They've decided to defend one of the most disgusting men in Canadian history rather than his female victims and their families. This is misogyny, Mr. Speaker. And when the Liberals vote against C-311, they will be voting against women and against choice. They will be once again protecting violent men, not vulnerable women. Conservatives are on the side of women and of victims. Thank you.
Hear, hear. I believe you have a point of order from the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member attributed something that I apparently did yesterday, I think she said. I certainly did not do that. The member might want to reflect on that, and the next time before she goes and makes accusations, she might want to know what she's talking about.
That is descending into a fair amount of the debate this evening, but maybe on that same point of order, the Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Speaker, I was in the House when the unanimous consent motion was called. That member said no. I rarely make a mistake about what that member does.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it was not me that said no. Perhaps this member should apologize, Mr. Speaker, because she is lying right now.
Is a what? All right. The Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Speaker, that member just called me a liar in this House. That is, and then walked out. Oh, he's back. That is not only unparliamentary language. We can all check Hansard and see what happened, but he...
He has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, I have the floor, and that this member is shouting over me when I have the floor is also unparliamentary. It's a disgrace.
Okay. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize for saying that the member was lying. What the member is saying is not true. She should check Hansard before she makes that accusation in this House, because what she is saying is simply and categorically false.
Okay, whoa. The honourable whip for the opposition.
Just turned to me, made a face, and gave the finger to me. I don't even know how you categorize that in the House of Commons. To all of us, and specifically to me, that member should be sanctioned in the strongest possible term. He should be thrown out of this House, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to take a break for a second here, and I'm going to consult. Okay, what we're going to do, because I was just consulting with the table officer, so I did not see what is being said has been happened. And what I'm going to do is review the videotapes, because cameras are on all the time, so we will review those cameras. I'm sure we will go back and look at it. I will remind people that we are in the House of Commons, and we should respect each other at all times, even though we disagree vehemently sometimes on issues that were before us. And to accuse and to maybe flip the bird or give the finger is probably something that should not be seen in this House at any time. I believe I'm going to go to the honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway, and then I'll go back to the honourable whip.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that I was coming into the chamber right at that moment, and I can tell you I did see the member from Kingston make an objectionable sign to the opposition with his finger.
Okay, the honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I clearly saw the member from Kingston and the Islands gave the finger, which is a symbol for a very specific phrase. Again, I would agree with my colleague that an apology is in order. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Since I can't ask someone to do something that might not be here, so I will go back and review it. All right. How about this? How about this? Maybe we go back on to the item that we're supposed to be dealing with. We're going to go back and look at that video. We'll take in consideration the things that we heard, and we'll come up with a response as soon as possible. So next on our speaking list was the honourable member for Brampton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak to Bill C-311, introduced by the Conservative member for Yorkton Melville. I'm proud to stand with my NDP and Bloc colleagues and with Canadian women across our great country in opposition.
Before we really get started, I apologize. I know the honourable member for Kingston Islands wants to stand on something.
Mr. Speaker, I do apologize for the frustration that I exhibited in the last few moments, but I want to reiterate that it was not me. Thank you.
It's not. I'm going to go back and look and see exactly what happens. Listen. Either we admit to doing something in the chamber, and we unreservedly apologize. The honourable member, Kingston Islands.
I admit that what the members are indicating that I did do, and I unreservedly apologize for displaying my frustration that way.
What was that?
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak to Bill C-311, introduced by the Conservative member for Yorkton Melville. I'm proud to stand with my NDP and Bloc colleagues and with Canadian women across our great country in opposition to this Conservative Bill C-311. This is a tightly veiled attempt at reopening Canada's abortion debate. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that this government firmly condemns all forms of violence against women, including pregnant women, and strongly supports a woman's right to choose. Throughout debate on this bill, we have heard the Conservative allege that this is not about abortion. I find this perplexing, Mr. Speaker, because the sponsor herself has connected the dots. So do not just take my word for it. Let's review what the sponsor has said about her bill. The member from Yorkton Melville rose in this House to advocate for Bill C-311 and in the same breath said that Canada has no abortion law, calling it a legal void and arguing that preborn children should be considered victims. The sponsor also linked a so-called pro-life petition on her website in conjunction with this bill. We are listening to the Conservative members across the aisle, and we hear them loud and clear. This is about abortion. I will remind my colleagues that anti-abortion organizations have praised C-311, claiming that this legislation affirms the humanity of the unborn. We have seen what happened to abortion rights just south of our border. On this side of the House, we stand in solidarity with American women who have seen elements of their reproductive health care stripped away from them, and those who are fighting to restore abortion rights. To Canadian women, we will always, always protect your reproductive freedom, and we will not let you down. Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking in this House tonight from a unique perspective as a member of both the Health Committee and the Status of Women Committee. This dual role allows me to witness firsthand the intersection of healthcare and women's rights. It underscores that access to safe and legal abortion services are a fundamental component of comprehensive healthcare. This is why the language and content of Bill C-311 raises concerns about potential implications. It is also very similar to previous unsuccessful private members' bill brought forth by the same member that tried to introduce the concept of a preborn child into the criminal code. The history of abortion rights and the ongoing battles to protect and maintain those rights demonstrate the need of vigilance. What we see today in one Conservative step to chip away at the established legal protections. I'm disappointed that I have not seen any Conservative caucus members speak out against this bill. Your silence speaks volume. This is about more than a change to the criminal code. This is about fundamental Canadian values. Let me reassure any Canadians who are listening that our government will never shy away from the standing up for our beliefs. We believe in access to abortion. This bill would actually weaken existing protections for pregnant women under the law. Our government takes gender-based violence very seriously, and we cannot support legislation that threatens existing legal protections. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to note that the judges already have the ability to grant aggravating circumstances if a victim is pregnant. This means that pregnancy is a factor to be considered at sentencing the judges in case of assault. This bill, as drafted, fails to achieve its stated purpose. Mr. Speaker, women's rights organizations have not shown any support for this bill, but it has received substantial support from anti-choice groups and individuals. I want to highlight a few organizations that have spoken out against Bill C-311. The Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada has condemned this legislation. Abortion is Healthcare, a group from the sponsor's home province of Saskatchewan, called out C-311 for slowly moving the fetus toward personhood. I thank these organizations for their work protecting reproductive rights. In contrast to Bill C-311, the Government of Canada reaffirms its commitment to safeguarding access to abortion and essential health care. Conservative Bill C-311 is not an isolated effort. It is a latest attempt to undermine the hard-fought reproductive rights that women in our country have secured. Mr. Speaker, last week I rose in this House to call on members to build a more gender-sensitive parliament. Canadians are watching, and they want to see us having healthy debates. Many women had comments on the overall work we do here. Sandra commented that she would like to see a solution-focused culture rather than the abusive environment. That is evident today. On this side of the House, we want to advance women's rights, and on the other side, they want to bring us back to square one. On this side, we are the party of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is firm belief that the Charter protects the right of abortion. This Charter right and all other Charter rights are not up for debate in our country. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about something else that is missing from this bill. That is the work that needs to be done to fight gender-based violence and keep women, girls, and gender-diverse people safe. In Budget 2023, the Government of Canada once again affirmed its dedication to protecting and preserving access to abortion, allocating $36 million over the course of 3 years for the renewal of the Sexual and Reproductive Health Fund. This financial support will guarantee that marginalized and vulnerable communities can access essential sexual and reproductive health care information and services. The 10 years National Action Plan aimed at ending gender-based violence is a crucial collaboration between our government, provinces, and territories. It includes a substantial $500 million over 5 years to assist provinces and territories in its implementation. Mr. Speaker, we are moving full speed ahead to advance gender equality. Today, we must stand together in opposition to this bill, while strengthening sentencing for crimes against pregnant women may appear to be the intent here on paper. It can leave far-reaching consequences for abortion rights. We must defend the reproductive rights of women and protect the principle that every woman has the right to make decisions about her own body, free from interference and judgment. We must not forget the struggles and sacrifices made by our mothers, our sisters, and countless brave individuals who fought tirelessly until abortion has decriminalized in 1988. And even as we make progress, there are those who seek to turn back the clock, to chip away at the progress we have achieved. Let me be very clear. Women's rights are non-negotiable, and abortion is health care. On this side of the House, we will allow the hard-won victories of the past to be discarded. Canadian women deserve better than this. I will be voting against this bill and urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le débat continue avec...
The debate continues with the member for Rivière-du-Nord. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, violence is a scourge in our society, regardless of who the victim is and regardless of the circumstances. It is unacceptable. Using violence, rather, when a man uses violence against a woman, well, that's a cowardly act. It's ugly. It's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Violence against children is just as cowardly. It's just as ugly and just as unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Violence against a pregnant woman is also ugly, cowardly, and unacceptable. It's odious. We can all agree on that, and I will never try to justify this type of violence here in this House. And even if I tried to do so, I would not be credible. I would not be able to do so. So you might ask, how can we justify our position? Because, yes, at the Bloc Québécois, we will not support this bill? Well, Mr. Speaker, we at the Bloc Québécois object to any attempt at undermining the right of a woman to decide for herself, the right to abortion, because let's not kid ourselves, that's exactly what we're talking about here today. The right to abortion lies at the heart of this issue. We thought the issue was settled years ago, but today it seems that debates on the topic are out of date, even, and with all due respect, they don't have their place here. Quebec and Canadian women have come a long way in this area. In the past, abortion was illegal, and then there was a period which was almost as dark, in which the right to abortion was framed. There were so many conditions and rules, and women needed authorization to go ahead with the procedure. Accredited hospitals needed the approval of a committee, the Therapeutic Abortion Committee, made up of at least 3 doctors, none of whom was allowed to practice abortion. So, in fact, these were anti-choice entities. Can we all agree on the fact that these people sitting on these committees were not pro-choice physicians at all? The battle of Dr. Henry Morgentaler played out before the courts for many years, and he was condemned to 10 months in prison for the illegal practice of abortion after the Supreme Court rejected his appeal in 1975. Afterwards, we had the 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was still not enough to prevent him from being brought to justice by 2 of his fellow doctors for having practiced abortions in Toronto. Well, at that point, the court determined that the provisions in the criminal court on abortion undermined the rights of the person of women. Therefore, the criminal court provisions were invalidated and they were never replaced. And from that moment on, Mr. Speaker, abortion was not illegal in Canada anymore, nor in Quebec. In fact, the Supreme Court in 1993 reiterated the fact that the provinces were not allowed to restrict the right to abortion by limiting it to public hospitals. So here we are today with a bill which, in all respect, we can qualify as pernicious because it is claiming that a fetus has certain legal rights. You might say that is the case, but still, in the criminal code, and the courts have recognized this, that violence against a pregnant woman is unacceptable, and that this is an aggravating factor which can be taken into account by a court when a sentence is rendered. We can agree, and I said this at the start, it is unacceptable, it's odious, and must be severely punished. But it does not mean that the provisions, my Conservative colleague, are acceptable. As we saw in the Queen versus RSW in 2021 at the Court of Quebec, and which was commented by Professor Lucie Lemonde at the Université du Québec in Montreal in her work, The Threat to the Right of Abortion and to Women. The provisions in the criminal code are enough to punish more severely anyone committing violence against a pregnant woman. The Honorable Michel Doyon, the bâtonnier of Quebec, in fact, referred to this before the Standing Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights in his letter of May 30th, 2008. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Section 718.2, subsection A of the Criminal Code, which already speaks to this issue at paragraph 3I1, and I quote, the tribunal will determine the sentence and will take the following principles into account. A, the sentence has to be adapted to the aggravating circumstances with regard to the commission of the act or the situation of the offender. Aggravating factors can include evidence which establishes 3I1 that the offense has had a significant impact on the victim based on her age or any other element with regard to her personal situation, including her health and her financial situation. As I said earlier, the Court of Quebec, which was seized of an issue in which a man abused his woman, was violent against her while she was pregnant, even though she'd already had children. So the judge determined justifiably that the provision in the code could lead to a more severe sentence against a man who had attacked a pregnant woman. Again, the Honorable Michel Doyon concluded in 2008 as well, Professor Lemonde, and he comes back on this issue in the article I mentioned earlier. So again, today, this bill is pernicious and dangerous. I myself, and I believe I speak on behalf of all the members of my party, we are all ardent defenders of the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and her own security, and this includes the right to abortion. We also stand in solidarity, and we stand firm against any form of violence. We have repeated that many times here in the House, and I and my colleagues feel that no mercy should be shown in violent crimes committed with a firearm. They must be punished severely. This House has to amend the criminal court to fight against organized crime, the illegal traffic of weapons. We are against violence, and we are against the undermining of the rights of women, which includes access to a safe abortion in our healthcare system. Again, dear colleagues, regardless of which political party we belong to, we have to be especially careful when we wield our legislative power in dealing with a subject as sensitive and potentially as dangerous, because it might undermine progress made in the legal system and progress made with regard to the rights of women. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is 2023, and we are in the House again debating something that should not be up for debate with 311. Well, the member from Yorkton Melville claims that this bill is about protecting women from violence. No organization that actually work to support and protect women from violence are enforcing this bill. Why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because the people who care about violence being perpetrated against women understand what is needed to protect and support women. The things that I and my fellow New Democrats have been fighting for in this House for years, the very things that this member and the Conservative Party have refused to support. Things like implementing the calls for justice from the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Things like legislation that would limit assault-style weapons. Things like a whole range of economic measures that would support women. Things like dental care, things like child care, things like pay equity. Like adequately and comprehensively supporting the full range of reproductive rights and health care in all regions of Canada, particularly in northern and remote regions. Like listening to experts like Julia Anderson, the CEO for CanWatch, who told the Foreign Affairs Committee just weeks ago that a 12% average decline in access to modern contraception results in an additional 734,000 unintended pregnancies. She also indicated that a 23% shift from safe to unsafe abortions will lead to an additional 491,000 unsafe abortions. And acting to provide more access to birth control and abortion and maternal health care will save lives. Things like ensuring that Canada adheres to the Feminist International Assistance Program, and that it lives up to the commitments it has made to support sexual and reproductive health rights for women and girls throughout the world by funding health care services like abortion. In fact, this bill, 311, does nothing to protect women or to support them. It is nothing more than an attempt to undermine women's rights in Canada, including the right to a safe and accessible abortion. It's taking away health care services from women, because abortion is health care, and taking away access to safe abortion does not stop abortion from happening. It stops safe abortion from happening, and it costs women their lives. And the right to control our reproductive health is fundamental to our rights as women. This is not the first time that this member from Yorkton Melville has attempted to undermine the rights to abortion and other women's rights. But I think this may be, Mr. Speaker, the first time that we've seen this kind of violence washing, using violence against women as an excuse, as a disguise for chipping away at women's rights. This bill pretends that judges don't already have the discretion to apply greater penalties for aggravating circumstances. This is completely false, and there is no valid justification for this legislation. Our legal system is already more than capable of ensuring that women are protected. Judges already have the ability to add additional punishment. In fact, there is only one reason for this bill to exist. It is designed to create a legal recognition for the fetus. You know, quoting from the member from Yorkton Melville in her own words, and I quote, "Canada has no abortion law. This legal void is so extreme that we don't even recognize preborn children as victims of violent crimes. It is my sincere hope that when the members table bills for consideration, that they do so truthfully and honestly, and that they legitimately believe in what they say about their bills. This bill is a blatant attempt to mislead this House and Canadians. There is no need for this bill. There is no rationale for this bill. And in fact, this bill is dangerous to women. It's dangerous to women in Canada. It's dangerous to women around the world. Actually harmful, Mr. Speaker, because we know that at least 40,000 women are dying annually around the world because of unsafe abortion. And I want to say it one more time. When we criminalize abortion, we don't stop abortion, we don't stop women accessing abortion, we stop safe abortion, and women die. Limiting access to abortions and reproductive health care does not stop abortions. I can't say that more clearly. Whenever a woman is denied the power to make her own decisions about whether and how often to become pregnant, her internationally recognized human rights are violated, and her health and her life are at risk. The best way to protect women and girls is to provide health care, provide support, and to not limit those things that women have access to. I've said this in this House before, Mr. Speaker. I have a daughter. I will fight to my dying breath to ensure that she can access every health care support that she wants in her lifetime, that she will always have the right to choose when she has children, if she has children, how she has children. And I would be a horrible person if I could stand in this place and want that for my daughter and not want that for every woman and girl in this world. So I will continue to stand and protect women's rights. And no matter how many times this member brings backdoor bills forward and tries to take away the rights of women, New Democrats will not support it.
Yes.
Continuing debate. Point of order from the honourable member from Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I guess there was some question earlier in this House whether or not the member from Kingston and the Islands supported the motion that I had proposed yesterday. So I'm going to pose it again. So if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion.
I think, before we do, point of order from the honourable parliamentary secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the member and definitely the Conservative caucus knows that you can't bring in a unanimous motion when we've already dealt with the unanimous motion request, and to continue to attempt to raise, the members know it's against the rules to do so. So I would suggest to you that the member interrupting a private member's hour in order to repeat a motion that was just rejected by a member, possibly two. I don't know who said no, but at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's appropriate at this time.
You can propose anything at any time with unanimous consent of the House. So, you know, even though it might have been shot down earlier, it can be brought forward again. This is important. I don't know if it's endless. No one's tried it endlessly, but I would also suggest that the honourable member, when we're sort of taking an attack at another member as well, for either shooting something down or saying no, is probably the bad start to proposing a unanimous consent motion. So I would say the honourable member for Niagara Falls. I just want him to thought, then I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that the House call for the immediate return of vile,
I'm hearing no's. I'm hearing no's again. So moving up. So moving on again to the honourable member for Peterborough Kawartha on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is always an honour and a great privilege to stand in the House of Commons on behalf of my community of Peterborough Kawartha. I would like to thank my colleague from Yorkton Melville for putting forth Bill C-311, which I will be speaking on this evening. Bill C-311, or an act to amend the criminal code, violence against pregnant women, is a simple and straightforward piece of legislation. If passed, it will create accountability for those who commit violence against pregnant women. Here is the bill summary that comes right out of the legislation itself. This enactment amends the criminal code to specify that knowingly assaulting a pregnant woman and that causing physical or emotional harm to a pregnant woman are to be considered aggravating circumstances for sentencing purposes. That is the entire bill summary. The bill is less than 1 page long. Let me quote it. Whereas Parliament wishes to denounce and deter violence against pregnant women by explicitly including pregnancy as an aggravating circumstance for the purpose of sentencing. It does exactly one thing: adds longer prison sentences where there is evidence that the offender is committing the offense, abused a person whom the offender knew to be pregnant, evidence that the offense caused physical or emotional harm to the pregnant victim. Violence against women has been recognized as a global public health problem since 2010. Violence during pregnancy is of special concern due to the adverse effects not only on the mother, but also the developing child. Violence during pregnancy has been associated with negative lifestyle behaviors, compromised prenatal care, poor maternal physical and mental health. When a perpetrator has been identified and found guilty, the sentence must be required to match the crime. And I think this is something all of us in the House of Commons can agree on. What we know and what my colleague has brought to light is that the Criminal Code Sentencing Provision Act is insufficient. It is well established that the risk of violence against women increases when they are pregnant, yet consequences for their attackers does not. According to Statistics Canada, intimate partner violence has steadily increased each year for the past 7 years, and 8 in 10 victims of crime are women. The Canadian Perinatal Surveillance System reported that women abused during pregnancy were 4 times as likely as other abused women to report having experienced very serious violence. And this is a little graphic for people watching at home, including being beaten, choked, threatened with a gun or knife, or sexually assaulted. Furthermore, there are more than 80 cases in recent Canadian history of women who have been killed while pregnant. Each of these women were killed by men who knew they were pregnant. Yet sentencing judges are not mandated to take these actions into account under the current law. Each and every one of us in this House, regardless of party lines, carries the responsibility to do everything we can to make public safety a priority, to ensure everyone, including our most vulnerable, are safe. In existing criminal law, if a pregnant woman is assaulted, and depending on her injuries, the offender could face a maximum penalty of 14 years if they were charged with aggravated assault. But with this new legislation, that person could be liable to a harsher sentence. This is a bill designed to increase public safety. This is a bill designed to show Canadians that we care about public safety. Who can argue with that? When you hear the facts, it seems like a no-brainer bill that would get the support of all members. But sadly, that is not the case. So often it takes a tragedy to change laws. And as you've heard, there have been almost 100 tragedies of pregnant women being murdered, and the law has still not changed. Today, we have a chance to do that. I spoke with Jeff Durham, who I know is watching right now. Jeff was the husband of Cassie and the father of Molly. Cassie and Molly were brutally murdered by someone known to them. Jeff has tried for years to get this law passed, and he expressed his deep frustration with me on the phone in a very private conversation that he allowed me to share with this House, that he cannot believe how politics continues to hijack this bill. Mr. Speaker, this country is failing victims, survivors, and their families. This country is soft on crime, and public safety is eroding rapidly. Canada's worst criminal in history has been moved to a medium security prison. What message are we sending to Canadians? There is no longer an incentive to be a good human because there are no consequences. It is time we stand with survivors, victims, and their families. It is time we show support with action. This bill is concrete action, and it puts in place a sentence that matches the horror of killing or assaulting a pregnant woman. We are Canadians. We should be protecting our most vulnerable, and that includes pregnant women. I ask every member in this House to stand up for victims, survivors, and their families. I ask every member in this House, every mother, to think about Jeff Durham when they cast their vote for this bill, to think about their sisters, their aunts, their daughters, their own mothers, how they would feel if someone attacked them, but worse, if someone attacked them while they were pregnant. The time should match the crime, and attacking or murdering a pregnant woman is among the most heinous of crimes. The mother is the most sacred of people in our society. Let's do something to fix it. Let's send a message that it will not be tolerated. Let's remove the politics from this bill. Let's stand with public safety. Let's implement a law that says we will not tolerate this, and let's vote in favor of Bill C-311. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Continuing debate with the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak today on Bill C-311. Mr. Speaker, I trust that all honourable colleagues in this House condemn acts of violence. The member from Yorkton Melville wants to amend the criminal code. She wants to mandate that knowingly assaulting a pregnant person or causing physical or emotional harm to a pregnant person is considered an aggravating factor in sentencing. This is already true, Mr. Speaker, as the member well knows. It's been said over and over again, judges already have the ability to apply harsher penalties when aggravating factors are present in a crime, crimes like knowingly assaulting a pregnant woman. The changes proposed in this bill are unnecessary. But, of course, the member knows that. She knows this bill's true intention takes no genuine action to end the ongoing crisis of gender-based violence. It is disappointing that we are having this discussion today because this bill is not about preventing violence. This bill is about something much darker, the backdoor codifying of fetal rights, the first step of removing a woman's right to choose. I want to make something very clear. Our government takes no joy in participating in this debate. It should not be grounds for political points or political gain. On this side of the House, we fundamentally believe in a woman's right to choose, and it is not up for debate. Access to abortion is health care, and it saves lives, plain and simple. It's the Conservatives who insist on bringing this up, who insist on reopening this debate. This is the third such bill that has been brought forward by the member from Yorkton Melville, and it will be the third such bill to be defeated. Whether it's about sex-selective abortions or the so-called Preborn Child Act or this bill about violence against pregnant women, we know a backdoor argument when we see it. It's an undeniable fact that violence against pregnant women specifically increases the likelihood of poor health outcomes for parent and child. Perpetrators of this type of violence, most often men, and most often intimate partners. But, Mr. Speaker, all types of intimate partner violence have an impact on the health of the victim, mental, physical, and emotional. Violence against pregnant women is no exception, and the problem is not unique to Canada. When this bill was first introduced to the House, the member opposite said, "I want every member of my party to have the freedom to vote with their conscience." If this bill was truly about pregnant women and the protection of children, the member would have the votes that she's already seeking. But it's not, Mr. Speaker. This debate is not about ending violence against women or children. Anti-choice groups are cheering this bill on because they believe it's the first step towards taking away a woman's right to an abortion. That will never happen under this government. We will fight this bill tooth and nail. Addressing gender-based violence shouldn't focus on pregnant women alone. It should focus on everyone at risk of experiencing this very serious form of violence. We need to focus on approaches that end gender-based violence in our society as a whole, not just in specific circumstances. Bill C-311 will never achieve that. Because our society is constantly evolving, Canadians are coming to better understand the harmful social norms that contribute to gender-based violence. They also increasingly recognize that our justice and social systems too often fail the survivors of gender-based violence. Canadians agree that we need a country free of gender-based violence, and they understand that we need a holistic approach to get there. The National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, launched last year, is the strategic framework for action across jurisdictions. Our goal is to support the victims, the survivors, and the families, no matter what. We're at the negotiating table with provinces and territories to implement the National Action Plan right now. The National Action Plan is so important to this work because it builds on actions that we've already taken to address gender-based violence. We've clarified the definition of consent. We've strengthened laws to address gender-based violence, including intimate partner violence. We've toughened bail eligibility for repeat offenders. We've passed Kira's law, meaning judges must be educated on coercive control. We've given courts the authority to mandate that perpetrators of intimate partner violence must wear an electronic monitoring device. And we've introduced 5 paid leave days for survivors of family violence, helping them access the supports that they need. Acts of gender-based violence are despicable. I believe in earnest that every member in this place supports that notion, condemns gender-based violence, and works every day to end it in this country. Fundamentally, gender-based violence violates our human rights. It takes a physical, psychological, and financial toll on victims, survivors, and their families. But, Mr. Speaker, the member knows well that bills like this are the entry point for the pro-life movement. They exploit one of the most painful parts of a woman's life. This legislation is a means to an end, to criminalize pregnant people experiencing miscarriages, and eventually criminalizing abortions. If we follow this path to its natural conclusion, this bill will give more rights to the fetus than to the person carrying it. Mr. Speaker, Bill C-311 is not trying to end gender-based violence in our country. To do that, we need to continue to work with the provincial, territorial governments, Indigenous partners, frontline organizations, civil society groups, and all people living in Canada who want to find long-term solutions to this problem that has plagued our country for far too long. We don't need distractions from that goal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Continuing debate. If I'm to recognize the honourable member for Yorkton Melville, it will be for her right of reply. The honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Speaker, I'm pleased to have laid my private member's Bill C-311 before this Parliament, and now to end this second hour of debate with my closing comments. The Violence Against Pregnant Women Act will amend the Criminal Code by adding 2 new aggravating circumstances to Section 718.2a. In other words, when an individual is charged with causing injury or death to a pregnant woman and has gone through a trial in a court of law and has been found guilty, the judge determining the sentence must consider evidence that the offender in committing the offense abused a person whom the offender knew to be pregnant, and or evidence that the offense caused physical or emotional harm to a pregnant victim. First and foremost, I stand here tonight in response to the families of victims who have done and continue to do so much in the midst of their grief, calling for these aggravating factors to be entrenched in our criminal code on behalf of pregnant victims of crime. Jeff Durham, who lost Cassie and Molly, and Sherry and Chan Goberdon, who lost Ariana and Asara, are the voices representing so many more who lived through their experience, their grief, and their call for greater justice. It's my privilege to stand here advocating on behalf of those who no longer breathe or have a voice, and on behalf of their families who have lost loved ones whose lives were taken in targeted, violent crimes, and on behalf of those who face violence daily while living in fear of injury because they've made the choice to carry their pregnancy to term. This evening, I'm incredibly grateful for the endorsements of cultural groups whose work involves a heavy focus on the prevention of violence, namely the Vedic Hindu Cultural Society, United Sikhs Canada, Overseas Friends of India Canada, Greater Vancouver Bangladesh Cultural Association, Baitul Makram Islamic Society, Pakistani Canadian Cultural Association, and the Sikh Motorcycle Club of Ontario. It's been an honor to spend time with each of these organizations and to receive their written support for the Violence Against Pregnant Women Act. I thank them again. I'm also thankful for the support of my Conservative colleagues from South Surrey, White Rock, and Peterborough, Kawartha for contributing to the debate in this place, and to the member for Brantford Brant, whose legal competence assured me that the claim that this bill could harm pregnant women was a fallacy. A special thanks to the member for Calgary Nose Hill, whose Substack article on this very issue reached 57,000 positive reads overnight last night as we have weighed in together on this difficult issue. And those people are not the people that they're claiming are putting this bill forward. I have deep respect for my colleagues and our leader who know that this clear, concise bill is about one thing: protecting vulnerable pregnant women from violent men. In my speech in the first hour of debate, I referenced the fact that 70% of Canadians and 73% of Canadian women want to see increased protection for pregnant women in our laws and want to see a woman's choice to carry her child to term have greater recognition and weight in our legal system. This is fact. I extend my sincere thanks to the thousands of Canadians who have made their desires known through their letters, phone calls, opinion polls, Substack responses, and very direct comments of disgust and disappointment on the Liberal social media campaign that misrepresents the intent of the Violence Against Pregnant Women Act. Since 2015, violent crime has increased by a third, and gang killings have doubled across our nation. Intimate partner violence has steadily increased each year for the last 7 years, and 8 in 10 victims of that crime are women. In first hour of debate, I spoke of a call from a young woman who, while pregnant, feared for her life and the life of her child. With the challenges she's now facing, limited income when food prices are skyrocketing, inability to work while wanting and needing to care for her newborn, waiting for a room in a shelter, finding a home she could afford, having had her belongings, her credit card, her bank account stolen by her abusive and threatening husband. She is nothing short of a strong, determined, and brave woman. This remarkable woman thanked me for bringing forward the Violence Against Pregnant Women Act. Colleagues, every measure we can implement to better care for pregnant women facing violence must be taken. The Violence Against Pregnant Women Act is one of those measures. Everyone in this place, including lawyers, know this is true. And Canadians await our decision.
The question is as follows. Mrs. Wagantall, seconded by Mrs. Finley, moves that Bill C-311, an act to amend the Criminal Code, Violence Against Pregnant Women, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. If a member of a recognized party present in the House wishes the motion be carried or carried on division or wishes to request to recording division, I'd invite them to rise and indicate it to the chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote, please.
So, pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23, 2022, the division stands deferred until Wednesday, June 14, 2023, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions.